Hello everyone, welcome on this demo on how the histogram works in Photoshop and how we can take advantage of this. This will be a quick one. I have several images here that will give us different types of histogram, okay? And in Photoshop, that's one of the tools that we have available, and I like to emphasize it because you guys also have that in your cameras, and most of them. If you have a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, usually if you hit the display option, we'll go through the menu and it will have a histogram that you can basically have on while you're shooting, and it can be a great aid to make sure that you have a good exposure in your camera. So I'm going to upload a couple of pictures here. Let's start with, let's say, this one. And right now I'm in Photoshop, and your Photoshop might look different, and that's okay. I'm going to show you how to reset it so we all have the same looking Photoshop. So on the top right here, we have a toolbar that has options that will change depending on what tool you get. Okay, so the toolbar is right here, and we have some other windows here, but yours might be different. There's something in Photoshop that's called Workspaces, and there's two different ways of getting to them. If you go to the top right here, it's where it says window, you have Workspace, and right now there's Essentials, 3D, Motion, Painting, Drawing, Photography. Okay, and I have RR, that's one that I have. So you can make your custom workspace. Another option is if you go here, it's the same thing. Okay, so if I go to Essentials, you will see that my windows change. Okay, so that's a whole different workspace. Now if I click here and I go to 3D, that's a different workspace. If I go to Motion, then I have the video on the bottom, and we'll have an assignment about that later on. If I have painting, that's a whole different workspace, and you will know that it will emphasize different things. Like painting emphasizes brushes and swatches and navigator and different options that you have here. Photography, this is the one that we're going to be working on most of the time for this class, okay, because we're going to be working with images. So photography is going to be the one that we're going to use, and we have graphic design also, which is great for type stuff and shapes and things like that. So the first thing I want to make sure is that you guys are in the same that I am. So make sure that you click photography. If you were playing around and you pull a window out, which I do all the time because I want to make sure they're close to my image, it doesn't matter. Like you can basically re-drag it back until you see that blue line, and then they'll snap to it. But if you want to reset it, you can go here and make sure that you're in photography. And right now it's going to say reset photography. And I click there. It's going to go back to the default. Okay, so don't be afraid of experimenting and pulling windows out and figuring out what it does. Oh my gosh, look at this. There's so many options. You can get crazy with these windows, and you can attach them basically to anywhere. Like it doesn't have to be on like the same place that it was. You can go somewhere else. So that's what we call an organic panels. So it basically can be moved and arranged however you want. And I actually like, my own workspace that I have the windows how I like them. And I save that, so that way if I go back, for example, if I go here to RR, this is how I usually use my panels right here. I actually don't have that one usually there. So if I reset it, you'll see that it will go away. So I have my layers, adjustment, the history at the bottom. I have some actions and some other stuff right here. I actually keep it very simple most of the time because I use a lot of shortcuts. But that's how I like mine. But for now, we're going to go back to photography. And as you notice, well, I have to reset it. The one thing that I think libraries, you can take it out so that way it's not distracting. I don't like using libraries. I like to have the adjustments be the main center of attention and the layers at the bottom. But the one thing I wanted to point out, and I'm going to drag it out so you can see, is the histogram. Okay, so the histogram is like your X-ray of the photograph. The left side is the pure black. The one on the right here is pure white. So then it goes to highlights, or the bright areas, very bright, midtones, shadows, dark shadows, and then black. Okay, so by looking at your histogram, you're able to tell if your image is well exposed. So let me show you a couple of them. So let's see, for example, this one, which is really bright. You can see that graph is now all the way to the right. Okay, so if your image is peaking over there, that means that this right here, this white area, has no information. It's just pure white. And the same thing will be when you do a black image. So with this one right here, it has a lot of black peaking all the way on the left, but it also has a lot of white right here because of the highlights in the fire. Okay, so those two create interesting. Let's see one that's kind of like dramatic like this one. This one has a lot of shadows, a lot of blacks, right? Because of this top part and the bottom. So you end up with this graph being all the way to the left. So this is a great tool for looking at your image. This one is mostly midtones and a little bit bright. So what you want most of the time is to have it as close as possible to the right without peaking, but it also depends on the image. So what you will do is when you're editing your pictures, you want to be looking at this graph to see how it's behaving, okay? So it can be a great aid. So I just wanted to point that out because you might be looking at it in your camera. It's like, what is that for? And then you look at it in Photoshop here and it's like, oh, there it is again. So that's what that does. And it comes by default when you're in the photography workspace. It's right there on the top. So you will see it. And the colors that you see there is because images in computers and projectors basically work in the RGB format. And for printing is CMYK. And I'll go over that later on when we start adjusting our images. But those are the colors that you see here. You see the red, blue, and green, and you see the opposites, which is cyan, yellow, and magenta, which is right here hiding. So that's basically what those colors mean. If you want to just look at the density of the contrast and the grays, basically it's the gray one. Here is basically split by the colors, okay? So I thought I would share that. And the main thing I wanted to do it also too is to make sure that you guys are all in the same workspace. Remember that you can reset it. Don't feel afraid of exploring and like pulling things out. Remember, you can always reset the workspace to go back to the original setting. But it's really helpful if you have the same workspace as I do. So when I'm pointing out a stuff, you can find it, okay? So make sure that you do that before we go to the next lab. I'm going to stop right here so you guys can make sure that you set up your workspace accordingly to mine so we can go ahead and dive in. So I'll see you in a little bit.